Welcome to the CFB Dynasty Podcast with hosts Matt Knowles and Brian McElfish.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? This is the CFBDynasty.com podcast. My name is Matt Knowles. Over here to my side is the one and only founder and creator of CFBDynasty.com, Brian McElfish, and our resident bridesmaid, Mr. Doug Gravely. How you guys doing today, Brian and Doug?
Oh, doing good, man. I'm down in Melbourne, Florida at my sister's house. Just a little family vacation for spring break. So a little different backdrop today, but it's cold as a mug down here, though. No beach for me.
So, Doug, how about you, man? I heard you had a little experience this morning, a little mani-pedi action going on.
Oh, I had to get my hair did, bro.
Yeah,
I gotta try to look good for the viewers, man. I don't want them to think that I'm a bum or nothing. They gotta.
So what about if somebody's listening? What about if somebody's listening to this on the audio version? What are you gonna do for them?
I might have to put on my deep raspy voice for them a couple times in the show.
Show them right now. Give them your best deep raspy voice for the guys on the audio podcast.
Hello, guys. How's it going?
All right, if you guys are listening to this on the audio podcast, we need a thumbs up or a thumbs down on what you think of that. Is Doug's deep raspy voice enough to keep you listening to this? All right, so today's show, really excited about the show. We're going to be going through the top running back performances for seasonal performances of all time in college fantasy. We got a list of the top 500 that's going to populate onto the CFBDynasty.com list. We're obviously not going to be talking about 500, but that's a ton of awesome data that we had to be able to sift through. We want you guys to make sure that you go and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, to Discord, to TikTok. You're going to look for @CFBDynasty or @CFBDynasty_, because there's going to be some highlight packages that are going to be put up for some of these players. Like I said, this is going to be a fun podcast. I know for me, when we looked through the list, the thing that was most surprising to me was seeing how many guys on this running back list, as opposed to the pros, where you could follow the top quarterback's trajectory to the next level. There were so many guys on this list that once they got done with college, you never heard their name again. That's the thing that surprised me. Doug, what about you?
Man, I was surprised that the top dog on the list, is only on there one time.
I can't wait to be able to tell people what that top dog is. We're going to get to that later. B-Mac, what about you, man?
Oh, it's just a blast seeing all these old names from childhood, really, that you just kind of watch and you look back at, you see how the running game has changed, where and we'll see it where it's not workhorse running backs like it used to be when I was young, and I miss that. Like I think about just the Thanksgiving and watching some of the backs that are on this list. So it's exciting.
Yeah, and the thing that I thought was neat, like you just said, looking at how few guys in the last, say, 5 to 8 years made the list, because exactly like you said, you could be a school like Alabama that has got a ton of amazing running backs, but you've just got workhorse after workhorse after workhorse that you can put in, and they can share carries.
Yep.
So they don't need to be like some of the guys that we have at the top of the list. But before we get to the list, we've got two awesome things also happening in the sports world right now. We got March Madness that just started, and NFL free agency, the tampering period. What do you guys think about the tampering period? Should teams be able to go out and negotiate on Sunday or Monday with a guy, make an agreement with a contact or for a contract, and then not sign them to Wednesday, or should they just be able to start signing these guys on Wednesday? What do you think about that?
With the Dolphins gear on? I feel like is this a Dolphins segment here, because they're the ones who had the illegal tampering, which tampering to me as a word, just it feels illegal. So come up with a better name, like whatever, initial negotiation period or whatever. But it's fun. I just saw breaking news that the Jets are working on a deal with Donald Driver, so that's pretty cool.
And the Bucks, literally as we just started, the Bucks signing Baker Mayfield.
If the Jets and Rodgers brought back Donald Driver from Madden 2004, that'd be awesome.
You know what? I think that'd be amazing. I was like, I'm not even going to react to this Donald Driver comment. See how many people actually were like, who? Donald Driver Jr., Donald Driver the fifth. And then, like I said, March Madness, the first 4 games started yesterday. Had some interesting basketball games already yesterday. If that's the way that that the tournament's going to be, I can't wait for this March Madness tournament, because it's going to be, last night's games were both great, and we'll just have to see. I'm hoping for that 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock on Friday game to not suck. We'll see if NC State can get past Creighton, but a lot of people are not giving the Wolfpack a chance. Not giving the Wolfpack a chance.
I have watched all of 0 basketball or college basketball. I used to be such a big college basketball guy. It just fell off hardcore, and I wasn't gonna do a bracket until our friends at Late Kick launched a bracket challenge with a chalice on the line. So I was like, all right, I gotta give this a go. And
if you guys
beat NC State, so sorry.
If you guys know BMAC at all, we're going back to 1980 on this list when it comes to the running backs, but if you go back in BMAC's history, BMAC was a basketball guy first.
Mm-hmm.
BMAC was basketball first and then football second. So to hear BMAC talk about basketball fell off the cliff for him, then I don't even know who this guy is anymore, man. I don't even know who you are.
Yeah. So from a watching standpoint, though, it's always been football first. I was always, like, before kids, obviously, I had more time to dedicate to just watching every season, and when I was little, playing every season of video game, even NHL. But I got less time these days, and college football year round is mostly what I care about, with some golf mixed in.
Well, and I think probably part of the reason, too, for BMAC to have basketball kind of fallen off is because we used to play head-to-head all the time, and I would whip his butt pretty much every game that we ever played is kind of how I want to remember it, that you just could never best me. Doug, what do you think of that? Do you think that that's the truth, or do you think that I'm completely talking bullcrap right now?
I've only seen Brian play basketball, so I'm going to have to go with bullcrap.
Well,
I can tell you this much. There was a yearly tradition that used to happen with us where we'd go out there to play, and BMAC would make some kind of garbage comment like, man, I'm totally out of form. I haven't picked up the basketball in like 6 months. I'm going to be awful. And then you get out on the court, and he makes some of the most nonsensical shots that when they're made just piss you off, that somebody could make a shot, could be like, I'm going to try to go full windmill, and I'm going to try and spin it off the top corner of the backboard, nothing but the bottom of the net. And you're like, and this is a guy that hasn't touched the basketball in a few months. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
I played with him a couple of times on Monday night, and then I realized how out of shape I was, and that my feet and legs hurt for like 3 weeks. So I was like, I'm done with this. But I kind of had a little JJ Redick feel with Brian. You just pass him the ball, and the dude's draining a shot, and I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. I didn't expect it to come from this guy, but there it was.
I'll tell you, BMAC back in the day was a force. But you know what? Also, BMAC was a force back in the day, just like some of these running backs we're going to be talking about a force today.
Somebody's got to segue us back into form here. Thank you.
Boom! How you like that for a segue? I
like it.
So this week we're going to do things a little bit differently than we did last week. We're actually going to go straight to the list, and instead of talking about some of the questions after we look at the list or before, we're going to just kind of talk about some of our thoughts as we get to this list, because there's so much we can talk about. So before we get to the top 25, BMAC, you brought up earlier how many guys made the list, but we're so far down the list, seasons that really surprised you that didn't come anywhere near the top. So why don't we start there? Why don't we start there with some of the guys that you were just blown away, didn't even sniff the top of our list?
All right, so blown away, I don't know if that's the right word or not, but it was cool seeing Marcus Lattimore still on the list. In our Dynasty League, he's one of the guys. I drafted him as a freshman. Loved watching those South Carolina teams play. I had Alshon Jeffrey, I think, as well. And Lattimore was just incredible. Had, NFL potential ahead of him, and ended up with the major knee injury. But yeah, 19 total touchdowns. He comes in at number 461. So, probably in the next 5-6 years from now, he won't be on this list anymore. But almost 22 and a half fantasy points per game. And then the other one that was a little surprising, just because it was right around the Marcus Lattimore area. my recollection of him is not at Purdue. It's at the Tampa Bay Bucks and kind of blocking for Warwick Dunn and whatnot, Mike Allstott. So he makes the list his 1994 year at Purdue, almost 1,200 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns, and 22 fantasy points a game. I was surprised to see Allstott on the list.
Yeah, and before we came on the podcast, you talked about some of the guys in recent memory. For instance, a guy that I was really high on all year, Israel Abanikanda. His past season only made 139 on the list. But then again, that's a pretty amazing feat considering he pretty much only played half the year because of injuries. And to have that kind of season and be at 139, and guys like you just said, like Lattimore didn't even sniff the top 200 is surprises me. And that Lattimore injury between him and Mackenzie Milton, those were probably two of the most gruesome injuries I've ever seen on the college football field. So for him to even play a game ever again after that was huge.
Both on my fantasy team. Yep. Good times.
So before we continue real quick, if this is the first time you're listening to one of these podcasts, especially one of these where we're going over the list, BMAC, why don't you tell them how CFBDynasty.com acquires the data, derives the data, and how the ranking is formed. This is not a opinion ranking. This is a data that's completely by the statistics. But what statistics are used and what is omitted to be able to get these rankings?
Yeah, so we manually gathered the data for at least the top 100. Most years it's the top 300 rushing seasons throughout the years, and that's from 1980 to current. And so then with that data, just create some formulas to calculate the fantasy points. So we're looking at 1 point for every 10 rushing yards, 6 points for a rushing touchdown, half point PPR, 6 points for a receiving touchdown, and 1 point for every 10 receiving yards as well. So there's some people on this list that, maybe weren't intended to be on the list. We do have some minimum thresholds, right? Because this is ranked by fantasy points per game. Since, back in the day, they played 8, 11 games. Now they're playing, 13, 14, 15. So is to kind of mitigate that issue right there. So you'll see some receivers that hit the list, like Percy Harvin hits the list because he hit the rushing minimum thresholds in terms of carries or whatever, and certainly had a good chunk of his stats through receiving as well, of course, as a wide receiver. And then just for some context, I threw in someone at the very bottom of the list. Lamar Jackson. So if you take away his passing data, rushing stats only, he would have averaged 21.78 fantasy points per game in 2016. That's ridiculous.
All right, that's some good stuff there, BMAX. So now let's start looking at some of the things on the list. We are going to go just outside the top 25 real quick. If there's anybody that jumped out to you, say, Doug, outside the top 25, is anybody you want to call out?
Outside the top 25? Not so much, man.
I can tell you,
focused on them 25 guys at the top.
One of the guys that really caused me some fantasy football PTSD when we were scrolling through the list, a name that I had blocked out of my mind is number 57, Donald Buckram from UTEP. Back in the day, I made a calculated error when it came to Donald Buckram. Took someone else. If I would have taken Donald Buckram at the time, we only have limited number of pickups. I went back and calculated. I would have won the championship that year if I would have picked up Donald Buckram. And that's one of those things that you kind of just had to put him out of the list. But that just goes to show if Donald Buckram from UTEP can be number 57 on the list, and we just talked about how guys like Marcus Lattimore are in the 400s, that just shows how good of a season he had, and I screwed up. Thanks a lot, UTEP. Never been the same since then.
Yeah, those are the ones you never forget, man.
What about you, BMAC? Anybody outside the top 25 that you were surprised or happy to see actually is up there?
Yeah, Pumphrey, Donnell Pumphrey. Let's see.
What about Devin Singletary? That's like the first really, truly fantasy relevant player from Florida Atlantic. He comes in at number 36. His 2017 season. He's one of the only guys that we talked about earlier, like within the last 5 to 8 years, that actually makes the list. One of the first truly fantasy relevant guys from Florida Atlantic University. Glad to see the Fighting Ground Owls jumping up onto this list.
Yeah, he was great. So for Pumphrey, like he was the start, I think, of the San Diego State run at running back, which led to our guy at number 25 today also. But Donnell Pumphrey, 2014, 15, 16, respectively, averaged 25, 24, and 25 fantasy points per game. So you got to love having just a staple, and that's just easy to build around when you get a guy like that who's so consistent.
All right, so BMAC, why don't you pull up the top 25? We'll start with 25 to 21. Let's make sure we get some 25 to 21 on here, and we'll take a look at these. I mean, if you're on the audio podcast, you can just kind of envision it for yourself, or you can go to the cfbdynasty.com website and go to the articles section and go to the all times. You'll have the tab there for top 500 running backs.
All right, I've got the screen shared now. So, our number 25 guy recently in the news just signed with Philly. We got Rashad Penny here, San Diego State, 2017, 2,200 rushing yards, 23 touchdowns. And yeah, San Diego State had that run from Pumphrey all the way through Penny. And then we're still now trying to get San Diego State running backs, but now they just disappoint. So 30.6 fantasy points a game that season. But I know I'm supposed to kick it to somebody else, but I got to keep number 24 because it's kind of, I know the list, but it's revealing it live one at a time. My boy, still on my team, even though he doesn't have a team, Leonard Fournette, LSU. I traded. So there's a guy in the office that was also in the league at the time. Doug has since taken over his franchise because of political arguments that happened in our fantasy league Slack, and should have squashed that long ago. But anyways, Leonard Fournette, when he was a freshman, I traded so much to get him, like probably 4 picks. I don't know, for whatever reason, it's one of those things where it's like I just gotta have him guy, and I hate LSU. I'm a Gator fan. So anyways, he was so much fun, also so consistent. It didn't matter the defense he was going against. He was just a hammer in that offense. 23 total touchdowns, 2,200 yards. He averaged 30.68 fantasy points a game. All right, Matt, now that I've taken 2.
That's all right. Scroll all the way up to 21.
Boise.
Scroll all the way up to 21. We'll take all 3. So yeah, Boise State comes in at 22 and 23. We won't reveal who's up higher on the list, but one of the interesting things about this list is Boise State is the only school to put more than 2 guys in the top of the list. Boise State has 3 guys in the top 25. That just shows you how consistent they are. I know BMAC mentioned San Diego State earlier, but how consistent Boise State is with putting out solid running backs. So in fantasy, Boise State is a school you always want to be looking at because they just seem historically to put guys out there, and not just in college, they put guys onto the next level too. That doesn't mean that they're going to be ultra stars, but there are always going to be guys from Boise that are going to have some kind of role in the NFL that are running backs. Jeremy McNichols, he was probably the 3rd or 4th in the most recent run. And actually was, like I said, a great guy at Boise State. Brock Forsey is somebody that, kind of before our time when it comes to college fantasy. We weren't even playing college fantasy at that point, but that was when Boise finally started making some national noise. Doug, I'm going to steal this number 21, but I am going to have you pronounce his name.
21's name?
Yep.
Yeah. Hang on. I lost my screen.
That was perfect excuse.
Washawn Tate.
All right, good. So now if we mess the name up, we're going to blame it on Doug. That's what we're going to roll with. So one of the other things, like I said at the beginning, that really surprised me is how many guys that did absolutely nothing outside of college are on this list near the top. With Sean Tate, as Doug says, I never even heard of him. Never even heard of Sean Tate. I'm not afraid to admit, but it's also 1995. But I don't know if he ever made it to arena football. I don't know if you guys are a fan of Toledo and you got some insight on what happened with Sean Tate. Go to the Discord, whatever. Let us know. It's just amazing to think that this guy is this high up on the list.
2,000 yards rushing.
Yeah, 2,000
total. Sorry, total rushing or total yards.
Yeah, never even heard of this guy. He averaged almost 180 yards a game rushing that season. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right, so I'm going to kick it back over to you guys. Let's go to the next list. I think we could go from 16 to 20 all at the same time, because then we start getting into some big names.
Oh man,
big names right there. So what about you, Doug? You want to take the start first comment on 16 through 20?
I'll chat about Larry Johnson a little bit. Went to Kansas City. Was primed to have a really good NFL career. I believe knee injuries and a head injury cut his career short in the NFL, but was a lot of fun to watch in college for Penn State. Just a bruising running back, like some of these guys on this list that we're going to talk about next. But I mean, Eddie George, probably one of my favorite running backs to watch growing up. Hated him for the fact that he played against the Jaguars, because I'm a huge Jaguar fan. But man, I love to watch that guy run the football. I'll kick it to you, B, to talk about some of the other ones, but I wanted to mention Eddie George for sure, because he was one of my favorites to watch as a kid growing up.
Yeah. B, take that next one, B, since you're on the San Diego State running back kick, and I'll jump to the 17.
Yeah, Eddie George, that was his Heisman year, 95, freaking incredible year. At Ohio State, of course. Ohio State, by the way, they're one of the top schools. So if you're looking at who's RBU from this list, we can talk about that next. Marshall Faulk, number 18, San Diego State, 1993 season. You remember him from the greatest show on turf. Is that it, Matt? Is that the right?
Yeah, absolutely. Greatest show on turf. That's right.
Yeah, greatest show on turf. Like 21 rushing touchdowns for Falk and only 3 receiving touchdowns that year. And if you remember those other years, if you had him on your NFL team, which I did, man, he caught so many balls and he was so great out of the backfield for Kurt Warner and them. But yeah, 32.08 fantasy points per game for Marshall Faulk out of the whack.
So next on the list, I actually contemplated wearing my Jay Ajayi Boise State jersey, which, fast fact, I'm a North Carolina State Wolfpack fan. The only jersey I own that is not NC State is a Jay Ajayi Boise State jersey, because I was an absolute fan of Jay Ajayi at Boise State that season. He absolutely dominated the Mountain West. And I remember where I was when the Dolphins drafted him with one of their multiple 5th-round picks. I was actually driving to Stevie B's Pizza Place in Ocala. And I remember listening on the radio, and I freaking screamed as loud as I could, because I was like one of my favorite guys in college. Just got drafted by my favorite pro team. JHI always had bad knees. He did not last very long in the pros, but even when he was with the Dolphins, he still did some good stuff.
Yeah,
but he's one of those guys that actually translated well from college to the pros. Just didn't last in the pros for very long. But there's another one of those guys from Boise State. So we've seen 17, 22, and 23, all Boise State guys. So that's why we're saying that's a school you want to always be looking for. If you're in the league I play in, forget about Boise State. You don't want them. Find somebody else. I'll draft the Boise State guys and take them off your hands.
That's how I feel when we're working on the Devy rankings and updating them all. Last night, I did push that into the Discord. Devy rankings, quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, all finally updated. Anyways, those are live on site and available with links in the Discord too. I try and get all this stuff pushed out first in Discord before we share it. It'll be on Twitter eventually, I'm sure. But LT, LaDainian Tomlinson out of TCU, comes in at number 16, one of my personal favorites. It started out in Matt's league as a 3 holdover league, and I think I drafted him as a rookie, and had him his whole career. So I loved watching him.
Boffle, the longest running pro fantasy football league out there, been running since 1996, consistently through. I wasn't the commissioner when it started, but I was the first champ. But yeah, that was back in the day, back in Boffle.
Yeah, man. But yeah, 2,100 rushing yards, 22 touchdowns, and he's another one who caught so many balls in the NFL. This was not what happened. The college game was so different back then. Even with your elite, if you were to pick a top 5 running backs all time in terms of effectiveness catching the ball, Marshall Faulk would be on your list. LT would be on your list.
Absolutely.
They didn't catch the ball much in college, and that's just the way the game has changed. But heavy running the ball still, 32 fantasy points a game for LT. Doug, I'll kick it to you. No, Matt, let me kick it to you. We got some of your favorite names here in this next.
So
group.
we're going up to okay. The next group. All right. So I have 15 Keith Byers. So let me tell you, Keith Byers is very interesting to have on this list because Keith Byers historically was a fullback. When he played in the pros, he would line up as a fullback. Keith Byers originally went to the Eagles, then he went to the Dolphins. Keith Byers was a part of one of the craziest Thanksgiving Day games of all time. The Leon let that ball alone snow game against the Cowboys.
Okay.
Keith, some of the highlights from that game, if you see the guy who scored the touchdown that does the snow angel in the ice, that's Keith Byers.
Didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, so Keith Byers, his big rumbling, stumbling style was great for that game. But Keith Byers was just a beast everywhere he was at. Ohio State, the Philadelphia Eagles, Miami Dolphins. Keith Byers was an awesome player, great personality.
Would he have been the Finns running back, the Dolphins running back, Tecmo Super Bowl years?
No, I think he's. I don't know. When was Tecmo Super Bowl?
89, 90?
I think Byers was early 90s when he went to the Finns.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, because he started off with the Eagles. But yeah, Keith Byers. B-Mac had mentioned Mike Allstott earlier. This is probably the highest up you're going to see a fullback or guy historically was a fullback on this list. So that's why I'm glad to see Keith Byers made it all the way up there. 1,700 rushing yards as basically his traditional fullback. 12 through 14, I'll take those only because they fit into my one category. We're going to just kind of basically just run by those really quick. Guys that did nothing outside of the college game. Guys that were really big in college. I mean, I guess 12, you can take that back. But Garrett Wolf from Northern Illinois, Troy Davis, Iowa State, did nothing outside of their college. But look at Garrett Wolf, 9 game season. He played 9 games, 1,580 yards. That's unbelievable. B-Mac, what do you think about number 12? You want to take him, Doug? You want to take number 12, Matt Forte, old Bears running back?
Bears. Yeah, he had a good NFL season. Short run, but it was a really good one. But yeah, we can move on to your boy at number 11.
Yeah, number 11, my boy Ricky Williams. I can tell you, Ricky Williams, again, one of my favorite college players of all time. I remember him just running roughshod all over the Big 12 back in the day. Ricky Williams was also famous for the Mike Ditka. I would give up my entire draft to draft Ricky Williams, and then he legitimately did give up the entire draft for Ricky Williams. And I know that Doug is probably a little bit jealous of Ricky because he's the one that got a pose on the Sports Illustrated cover in the actual bride's dress with Mike Ditka. He was not a bridesmaid. Thank you, sir. Boom. He was not a bridesmaid. He was the bride on that cover. There has been some big trades, a lot of people trading a lot of draft picks, but that trade basically showed that you don't want to go giving up an entire draft for a single player. Even though we've had some huge drafts, draft pick trades in recent years, it just didn't work out for the Saints the way that they wanted it to give up their entire draft and more just to get the one player.
But this is Heisman year, I believe, 97, Ricky Williams.
Yeah.
I think so.
11 games, almost 1,900 yards. And a little birdie told me this might not be the last time we see Ricky Williams on this list. So why don't we scroll on up?
All right, here we go.
All right, so BMAC, I'm going to let you take 9, but we got a couple of guys on this list. Kevin Smith, number 7 from UCF. Anthony Thompson, number 10 from Indiana. Once again, guys that had great years in college, did not translate over to the pros. So if you're in a college to pro league, you're very disappointed that these guys did not do anything for you outside of the college game. Mike Rozier from Nebraska, one of those guys that actually went and made his name by playing in the USFL. He played in the original incarnation of the USFL and did nothing in the NFL, but was one of those guys that was the top dog, one of the top dogs coming from Nebraska into the USFL. But he played for Nebraska back when they were the Big 8. So Brian left a couple names off the list. Doug left a couple names off the list, the bigger games. Why don't you guys take those? Number 6 and number 9.
Sure, 6. So at number 9, Monte Ball, Wisconsin, and Melvin Gordon was number 6 at Wisconsin. Wisconsin has been one of those throwback teams where they have the single running back all the way up through Jonathan Taylor, and you kind of finally things are going to shift around where they come into present day where they're going to pass it around a little bit more under the new coaching staff. But they've had an amazing run of fantasy running backs. It's always like a battle to see, all right, when one of these guys leaves, like a Monte Ball or a Melvin Gordon, who's the next guy going to be? And of course, all of them that are in the running are worthy of getting drafted in a scenario like that. But yeah, both. So Monte Ball, 1,900 yards, 39 touchdowns for a total of 33.5 fantasy points per game. Melvin Gordon had only 32 touchdowns, but 2,587 yards. That's just ridiculous. That's on the ground, 2,700 yards total.
So, Doug, you've only been playing college fantasy for, 4 years now. And what we're talking about Wisconsin historically is not what you've seen when it comes to Wisconsin. What do you think about Wisconsin? Are you like, hey, I target Wisconsin? Or are they just like one of those schools to you as a new player in college fantasy?
So I've only been around the college fantasy game for 4 years. I am familiar with college fantasy and college football in general. Wisconsin, I've always known them to produce really good running backs, but right now they're not a school that I target, to be honest with you, because I don't even know what identity they carry anymore.
Yeah, well, let me educate you real quick. So let's go to who is RBU for this list in fantasy purposes since 1980. So tied at 9th is Oklahoma State and Texas Tech. And then there's a 4-way tie there for 5th with Northern Illinois, Boise State, Alabama, and Navy. And then we have a 2-way tie at number 3 with San Diego State and Toledo. Ohio State comes in at number 2, and Wisconsin coming in at number 1.
But I do think that Doug though has a good point though, because for somebody like myself and BMAC that have played for a while, we might get stuck in thinking about where Wisconsin has been in the past.
Yeah.
And always trying to find that guy. Doug, as a newer player to the league, he's like, dude, since I've been in, Wisconsin's just been a school. If you went back and reran the RBU for the last 4 years, I would bet Wisconsin is not even going to make the list. Maybe they're there, but maybe in the top 40. Just in the last 4 years.
Present day scar tissue for you on this one too.
Oh yeah, well, and you too, because we both went and tried to pick a running back that was going to be the guy, and I remember I picked the guy that ended up becoming the starter. And we all thought that, oh man, this is going to be great. And your guy was not going to do good. And then my guy sucked as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's see. So I guess we're now down to the top 5. So let's just go one at a time here. So top 5, first one, Luke Staley for Brigham Young. Brigham Young puts a lot of guys statistically out there. I think that one of the problems with Brigham Young and we might see this change now they're going to become a member of the Big 12, is that Brigham Young being an independent is not Notre Dame is an independent. Notre Dame is an independent, and they are always scheduling incredible competition. BYU, think back to the COVID year when everybody just had to like figure out what their schedule was going to be, and everybody kind of consolidated who they were going to play. Notre Dame was able to play an ACC schedule. Brigham Young had to just play whoever they could get, and they played basically group of 5 schools the whole year. I think their toughest game was Coastal Carolina, which they lost.
Yep.
So Brigham Young a lot of times is known for playing a little bit weaker competition. So they're able to put up a lot of stats. That being said, not trying to take anything away from Brigham Young, they just always have an offense that puts big numbers out there. But there's a guy, Luke Staley, top 5 season all time, that was unable to do anything, have it translate to the next level.
All right, let's go. Let's stick with you, Matt, on number
Sure.
4. I remember his NFL days, but yeah.
I can tell you Marcus Allen. So for those of you that don't know, back in the deep day, BMAC was probably not even a glimmer in his parents' eyes at this point. But back in the day, I was equally a Miami Dolphin fan and a Los Angeles Raiders fan. Oh yeah, back. I was a huge fan of the Raiders back in the day when I played football, which I didn't play a whole lot, but when I did, I was a huge fan of the late 70s, early 80s cornerback duo, probably the greatest cornerback duo ever, Lester Hayes and Mike Haynes, and that got me becoming a fan of the Raiders back then. And so I remember Marcus Allen playing for USC, Marcus Allen getting drafted to the Raiders and being the MVP of Super Bowl. Was it Super Bowl 18 against the Redskins? Nobody gave the Raiders any chance. But everybody expected that hometown boy, Marcus Allen, who went to USC, was going to do great in the pros, and that's exactly what he did. Hall of Famer, amazing running back when it was the Pac-10. 12-game season back then, 2,427 yards, which is insane. Yeah. Insane for a guy back in that day to put that many yards up, because you only had a 12-game season. You had 11 games and then a bowl game.
Yep.
And that was it. So 2,400 yards back in that day was unbelievable. But Marcus Allen, one of those guys that had an amazing career that translated from great college up to the pros. B-Mac, going to throw it back over to you for number 3.
Yeah, number 3 was Rashawn Salam out of Colorado. So I remember him. Just a great running back. And this is Colorado coming out of a stretch. This is only a few years removed from their last national championship, I believe in 1990. But whatever, 24 touchdowns, 35.5 fantasy points per game. Matt, I'll kick it to you for number 2.
Number 2, I feel like we already talked about him once, but that's because we did talk about him once. The only guy to have 2 seasons in the top 15 or so, only guy to be on this list multiple times, Ricky Williams. Ricky Williams, again, you just can see historically that he was consistent. Doug, you brought up a stat about Ricky earlier about his consistency.
Oh, I did?
You did.
I don't even remember.
You said Ricky was that he was on this 4 times. You said you saw Ricky's name on there 4 times.
4 times.
Yeah, very, very few running backs, if at all, are going to be on this list 4 times. And we didn't go back and look at in the top 500 how many guys are on it 4 times. But I would dare say that Ricky might be the only guy on the list 4 times. Which is unreal.
I saw one more.
Who's that?
Ball.
Ron Dane.
Oh, Dane. Yeah.
Ron Dane, Wisconsin guy. That doesn't surprise me at all. Doesn't surprise me at all.
Mm.
But this season is obviously, because it's higher up on the list, is better than the season that he had that we talked about at 11.
I mean, imagine. Oh, sorry.
No. Go for it.
I was going to say, imagine having a guy scoring 38 fantasy points per game for you at running back, but the next guy,
the next one is
7
insane.
points higher.
Well, yeah, Ricky Williams, like I said, unbelievable talent in college, unbelievable talent in the pros. Some of the best, most fun games I ever saw were watching Ricky Williams play, both in college and in the pros. But yeah, that's my guy to talk about at 2 and 11. Doug, we're kicking it to you for number 1 because you not notated this right off the jump. Who is at number 1, and what's the thing you notated that was great about him?
So with Barry Sanders from Oklahoma State being at number 1, averaging almost 46 fantasy points a game, 45.9. The crazy thing about Barry Sanders is he's only on this list one time, and it's number 1, and it's not even a close margin. Like, he blew everybody away. I mean, he's averaged 7, almost 8 points more than number 2.
That's stupid.
That's insane.
It's got to be the best fantasy season of all time. Got to be.
We went back when Doug pulled that up. We're like, is there a problem with the numbers? And we started looking, and we were like, yeah, he had 2 very pedestrian seasons his freshman and sophomore year, and then just went absolutely intergalactic.
So I do list it out. So if you want to take a look at his game by game stats from that 1988 season, it's listed out right ahead or right on top of this, but I'll give it to you for you guys who are listening in. 18 attempts, 178 yards, and 2 touchdowns rushing, which included an 89-yard rushing touchdown, and he returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. That's just week 1. And then we go 20 carries against Texas A&M for 157 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, also added a punt return touchdown. And then against Tulsa, 33 carries, 304 yards, 5 touchdowns. And then at Colorado, really good team at that point. 24 carries, 174 yards, 4 touchdowns. Nebraska, 35 carries, 189 yards, 4 touchdowns. Against Missouri, 25 carries, 154 yards, 2 touchdowns.
What a terrible game right there too. His worst game of the year.
Yeah,
he could only get a paltry 154 yards rushing. Man, they really shut him down.
And then listen to this. So at Kansas State, 37 carries, 320 yards, 3 touchdowns. Next game, 39 carries, 215 yards, 2 touchdowns. Then against Kansas, 37 more carries, 312 yards, and 5 more touchdowns. And then against Iowa State, 32 more carries, 293 yards, 4 touchdowns. And then December 3rd against Texas Tech in Tokyo. Interesting. 44 more carries, 332 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That's crazy. And then not even counted would be the bowl game where he goes 29 carries, 222 yards, and 5 more touchdowns. Also completed 1 of 2 passes.
And I think that also shows how different society is now than it was then. Who in their right mind is going to throw a game in Tokyo on December 3rd, the day of the Heisman Trophy? Got it listed there. He got the Heisman Trophy the day of the game. So nowadays you're going to be getting guys that are all going to be going to the Downtown Athletic Center, and they're all going to be there and make a big deal about it. Interviews. Dude wasn't even in the country when he won the Heisman Trophy. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. What a season. I posted a highlight video. If you haven't seen it for whatever reason, that 1998 or 1988 season, you got to just go there, go to the post, running back all-time rankings, check it out. It's ridiculous. And we'll be posting, like Matt talked about in the beginning of the show, like we posted Lamar Jackson, some highlights on TikTok. We'll be sharing it on YouTube Shorts and Instagram, but Barry Sanders is coming up right after that too.
So, all right, so that's the entire list. That's what we got to talk about today. We do have some other things we want to call. We took a few other notes. Doug, is there anything that we notated that we did not call out when we looked through the list that you want to make sure that we point out? Guys that you had that were on your team, guys that were your childhood, guys you were fans of that you were glad to see make the list?
Oh, man. Favorite players from my childhood, like I said before, Eddie George was one of them. And then Marcus Allen, I was young, but I remember watching him play because my mom was a Raider fan. So I remember watching him play with her. Tiki Barber was another one that I enjoyed watching. And then, like I said, being a Jags fan and honestly a Florida fan, Fred Taylor, one of my favorites to watch. He came on the scene in Jacksonville and kind of helped set a staple for them and what people want out of their running back room, as a Jags fan forever. It was Fred Taylor kind of set that for us.
What about you, B-Mac?
So LaDainian Tomlinson, loved watching him, even at TCU before he came on at the the San Diego Chargers where everybody knew him. Barry Sanders, of course. Yeah, I miss those Thanksgiving Day games, honestly, with Barry Sanders and John Madden and Turducken and Brett Favre, and just some good times, good memories, especially when they had the blanked out old school helmets. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
Marshall Faulk, of course. Edgerrin James is on the list. They were early in my fantasy days. I remember, getting them in little holdover leagues or whatever, having Marshall Faulk and Edgerrin James. So yeah, it's just fun seeing these names on the list. And Fred Taylor too. Also, I was a Gator fan. It was before I was too young for Emmitt Smith, and Fred Taylor and Eric Rett were the first Gators that I really remember watching at running back, and Fred Taylor was great.
I like seeing scrolling down the list. Bishop Sankey from Washington was at 95. He was incredible in college. Did not translate to a very good yards per carry average in the pros, but Bishop Sankey was a monster for Washington. Pretty surprised. Did you guys see was Zeke on the list anywhere above 99? It looks like Ezekiel Elliott 99 for Ohio State. Pretty timely considering they're talking about Zeke might be getting cut from the Cowboys right now today, the day we were recording this podcast. Amazing that a guy was unbelievable at Ohio State, a guy that was probably the number one pro fantasy pick in so many drafts over the years, might be leaving the Cowboys now to go on to probably not as greener pastures, probably weedy, a little bit, burnt from the temperature, pastures, because, the Cowboys are going to probably be releasing him. But yeah, back in the day, Zeke was amazing. I would have thought that Zeke would have been a little bit higher on the list. Chris Johnson barely misses the top 100. Chris Johnson was unreal back for East Carolina back in the day. Let's see here, Kenyon Barner back when Oregon had the run. Michael James and Kenyon Barner. They had tons of guys. Kenyon was a guy I had on my squad. Hung around in the pros basically as a punt returner and a kick returner for a long time, and never really did much as a running back. But yeah, just interesting seeing some of these guys. I mean, I know we brought up Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson doesn't even make it into the top 100, and he's had some amazing seasons.
Yeah, and he's as close as we have now to a workhorse running back. They just don't get the touches. No, certainly not like Barry Sanders did. Texas might have won a few more games, though, if they did.
They potentially, yes, for sure.
So if you guys weren't listening to the podcast and hear the podcast last week, B-Mac asked a question. B-Mac, why don't you ask that question again? And we'll see what we say.
All right, let's come up with a new way to phrase it. So let's go back to the Donald Driver joke. If you're Aaron Rodgers, right, and you're trying to get one guy on your team at running back that you're just going to hand the ball off to win you one game with your life on the line, who are you going to recruit, since he's recruiting all these old guys to come to his team or his new team? Like, who are you going to recruit to be that running back, that
is not named Barry Sanders,
right?
I mean, I'll go first just because I've got the easiest answer. You guys are much more fun answers. But I'll go the easy way, and that is I can't not take Ricky Williams. Ricky Williams, consistent in college, wearing his pro jersey right now, consistent in college, consistent in the pros. Actually, one of the reasons why he left the pros, why he left Dave Wanstead's office, is because he felt like he was used too much. And he felt like he was just getting beaten down by getting so many carries every single game. But the fact of the matter was he was dominating people every time he touched the ball.
You're not worried about that pregame drug test at all?
Not nowadays. We're talking 2023, man. That's not going to be an issue. 2023 not going to be an issue. We can have Ricky Williams in his prime, but time travel transport him to 2023. We're good to go. What about you? Right. What about you? Let's go to BMAC first. I think Doug. I think you probably have to come up with your one. But BMAC, who do you got?
All right. So, not named Barry Sanders. I'm gonna go with my my guy LT, LaDainian Tomlinson. I think obviously if you need him to catch, he can catch, but on the ground he was just unstoppable. One cut, multiple cut, and up to top speed in a hurry. I'd roll to the death if needed with LT.
All right, what about you, Doug?
So I was torn between two, and I went with one that probably isn't very likely for everybody else, but Jeremy McNichols out of Boise State. In his 2 years as the starter at Boise State, he averaged over 30 points a game, fantasy-wise. He was a receiving back as well, averaged 5.5 yards a carry whenever he touched the rock. I mean, so I went with him over. I was going to pick Marshall Faulk, but I went with somebody that, like I said, averaged in his 2 years as a starter over 30 points a game.
I think you can't go wrong with either one of those. Jeremy McNichols coming out of that Smurf turf Boise State offense that just churns out running backs. I mean, you still got Alexander Madison in the pros right now. So yeah, if you got Boise State and Jeremy McNichols, he and you've got Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. I think the Jeremy McNichols is not a bad way to go, especially when you're talking based on college performance.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, BMAC, is there any news and notes or any CFBDynasty.com information that you want to be throwing at the listeners and the watchers before we head on out of here for the day?
Other than the Devi rankings that I mentioned earlier, so if you're on the depth charts, which is not going to be free for much longer, that'll be just roped into the package of any of the plans that you select on the site. Doug did get all of the running back ones in there. So behind the scenes, we're going through kind of ranking them all. We've got our top 50. If you guys reach out and want us to publish that, we can publish that now. But those are done and ready to go live. We'll have our teaser rankings coming up sometime soon. But all of this stuff is exciting because you want to find the next guy that's going to make one of these lists, and we're alongside with you trying to help do that for our own teams too.
So for those of you that are listening or watching that are not familiar with Devi, why don't you guys explain what Devi means? And then the second question, you guys can both take the questions. You can split them up. The first question is just explain to people what Devi is and how different is it for you when you're creating the rankings to create seasonal rankings, dynasty rankings, and Devi rankings. What's the different processes there?
Yeah, so basically, like there's the standard redraft league, which is just new player pool, fresh player pool every year, whatever. And then there's the dynasty / redraft style league, or not redraft, sorry, dynasty / keeper league, where you just keep all your players or a certain number of your players from year to year. And then there's Devi, which is like college to pro. Basically, that's the pro potential version of the rankings that are there and live for you. So if you're like if you're a Jets fan and you want to know what the top running backs are, coming out next year, that's a good list for you. If you're obviously in a dynasty or a Devi league, those leagues are right up, or those rankings are right up your alley.
So what about you, Doug? What do you think about because if you're there putting the rankings together and you're helping BMAC get the CFBDynasty.com back end together, what's the different thought process that you have to look at when you're putting these different rankings together?
Oh man, it's a lot that goes into it. Brian and I have had some discussions about where we're putting people. If we agree or not. There's disagreements, and I'll tell you that for sure. But the consensus is, just like Brian said, trying to find that guy that is going to propel your college team and potentially be, the next Barry Sanders in the pros. And it's so hard. I mean, you look at the conference they're in, you look at the teams they play against, you look at, did this guy have just a great offensive line and he's kind of a mediocre running back? I mean, there's so much to look into, but that's part of this process that makes this so fun. But yeah, I think a lot of the fun part too is, the discussions behind the scenes between BMAC and I on who we agree with, who we think should be where, because everybody's opinion is going to be a little bit different, but there's a lot that goes into it.
And I think it's always tough too, because you're like, guys in college, you might be like, man, this guy's going to be a blue chipper. There's no doubt this guy's going to be good. And I guarantee you that everybody we just talked about in the top 25 at those top 25 seasons, somebody thought there was going to be some mileage out of them when they get to the pros. I doubt you were going to see some of those guys that weren't going to be on a Devy list at some point, if there was a Devy list even back in the day then. So it's interesting how the process, the analytics, I'm sure that the Searchalytics backend that is built is helping you guys to be able to put some of this data to best use, which is pretty cool, being a data company, and then being able to utilize probably some of those tools from the data company on this kind of data probably helps to be able to weed out some of those guys that may have a great college year, but not be somebody that's going to actually go to the pros. Do you feel like your tools have improved over time there, BMAC, being able to try to really pinpoint the guys that are going to be really good on the Devy side?
Yeah, for sure. And, this doesn't correlate to Devy necessarily, but it'll be good for every single league when we have the new tools that launch. It's going to be around August, so we're not going to do like a big presentation or a lot of marketing behind it, but they're going to be super cool, like top of the line tools that we don't have currently in college fantasy.
All right, guys, well, unless you have something else that you want to talk about, I think it's time to end this podcast, get back on with our day. Remember what BMAC said. Get your butts over to YouTube, to TikTok, to Discord. Look for @CFB Dynasty or @CFB Dynasty _. You need to like, subscribe, follow, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, on the Discord, we want you guys to go up there and be a part of the community. We want to hear what you guys are thinking. We want to hear your thoughts, especially agree and disagree. Obviously, you can't disagree with the stats that we've provided, but you could agree or disagree on the ones that we called out about, a guy didn't really have much of a pro potential. Maybe a guy went to the CFL and did great there, and we just didn't realize it. Maybe a guy became an Arena Football League player and had a great career there. Let us know your thoughts. Do you think that there are some guys that we called out that we shouldn't have, or vice versa? But definitely become a part of the community. The community during the season is great, especially when people are asking about their lineup choices. I've got to pick 3 of these 4 wide receivers, or what do you think about this trade? But you got to be a part of that community. Let's develop that thing now in the off season, so that way it's a big, huge community during the season, so we can have a lot of fun there.
I concur.
All right. So Doug, anything else you want to say before we head on out of here?
Nah, man, just hope you guys have a good day, and everybody listening and watching, man, have a good week. And like we said, subscribe to our channels, man. If you know people, have them subscribe too. Even if they don't listen yet, they might hear something that catches their ear, and they might start listening and get as big into this as we all are.
Yeah, I think we're like right around 100 subscribers on YouTube. That'd be a great initial thing for you to, go whatever, take your mom's phone, also subscribe from her phone. She won't know, and it'll help us out.
Sounds good. We'll be back next week with the what you would expect is the logical progression in this, the top probably 500 wide receiver seasons of all time. I think that one's going to be great, because wide receiver more than quarterbacks or running backs. We're going to see a ton of dudes that probably did nothing outside of college, and probably some other guys that did amazing. But I think wide receiver more than running back and quarterback, you're going to see a lot more movement in there as guys that were college only compared to the pros, because that's probably the most difficult position to translate from the college game to the pro game. So I can't wait to get to that list. I know BMAC and Doug feel the same way. We're so thankful for you guys listening to the podcast, watching this on the different channels. We will see you guys next week. This is Matt Knowles for Doug Gravely and BMAC. See you guys.
See ya.